Okay. We are now recording, and I will.
Waiting room.
So please, everyone, put on mute when you're not presenting. Okay, Denise, please go ahead.
Okay. Good. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first Earth Day event. I'm a global citizen on planet Earth. My name is Dany Erkush. 2 nationalities, 4 languages, and 4 countries so far. I lived here. I'm a former corporate warrior, now an impact investment catalyst, an influencer, investment funds builder. I represent my company SiDeMi, as you see here, with the simple but innovative solutions. Today, we are celebrating the 51st Earth Day. I just picked up a few facts for you on the Earth Day. It started with Senator Gaylord Nelson. He conceived the Earth Day in the early 1960s. He was worried that the environmental issues were not being addressed in the political arena. That was early 1960s. And then the first Earth Day event, it happened in 1970, then became global event in 1990. And in the meantime, the Earth Day inspired people. In 2012, 100,000 Chinese went to work in bikes on the road. In 2011, 28 million trees were planted in Afghanistan. And last year also, there was a massive celebrations. So it's an inspiring event. Now, this year we are celebrating a 51st anniversary, and I'm going to read exactly the theme is of 51st Day. Our theme is Restore Our Earth, which will focus on natural processes, emerging green technologies, and innovative thinking that can restore the world's ecosystems. So today we are here together to celebrate exactly what the theme is talking about. We have our guests and we have our investment opportunity presenters. As you will see when you will hear the presentations, the theme is exactly impact and technology and innovation meet in those investment opportunities. So what is happening in the earth now is amazing. I think we should all be seeing the positive movements going on at the moment. Since pandemic has started, there is more and more focus on the impact investment and ESG and so on. But on one way we can make a difference to the world by putting capital into the amazing projects that is going to create positive impact to our planet and humanity. At the same time, we can also impact by being us, by being ourselves, and impact positive impact to the world by doing one good thing a day. So if everybody does that in the world, then we can make a big difference. So taking this point now, we are going to have an hour and a half together. We will start, the next presentation is going to be by Francesca Nugnes. She is a consultant in International Institute for Sustainable Development, followed by the 3 presentations. First and third presentation will be for 12 minutes, and then the middle one, Congo-Basin, will be for 5 minutes, followed by the panelists, and then we will have a Q&A sessions. We have about 70 registrations to this event. So please use the chat, and please use the opportunity to network and ask questions and be active in the Q&A as well, so that we can all connect together, because we all share the same purpose at the moment. So now I'm giving the speech and the screen to Francesca to do the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Continue. Yes, here I am. It's coming. Me. Here it is. There we go. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for inviting us. I'm Francesca Núñez, a consultant for the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and I will present our work on impact investments in forest, SME, agroforestry, and notably the role of certification, if there is a role for certification in encouraging investment in forestry. The International Institute for Sustainable Development has been working a long time in sustainability standards, trying to understand how to better leverage them. ISD notably works on two main streams. One is about research, and another one is about advisory services. The research is mainly focused on, for what it concerns the sustainability standard program, comparing certified products and conventional products to try to understand the trends that we have in the market. And more ISD is moving towards, let's say, playing at the interface between sustainability standards and public policy. Here I have a few shots of the different publications we are working on, notably one upcoming publication this year about finance and sustainability standards exclusively in the agricultural forestry sector. Now, based on the multiple conversations we had with investors and different investment cases that we've been building, we are proposing here simply 5 best practices to invest in agroforestry SME. We are particularly keen to agroforestry, but the issues are the same in the forestry sector, and I would be glad if you can share your inputs here. First of all, we have a multitude of small suppliers in the forestry sector, so they need to be aggregated to increase their negotiation power, to give them the opportunity to share facilities. And of course, from the investor perspective, it is easier to monitor costs and better mitigate transaction costs when the suppliers or the small loggers are organized in a cooperative, in a producer organization, so forth. Then moving more to the aspect of the investments, we think that it's important to have what we call a customized financial products, a financial product that is designed on the needs of the farmers. I call them farmers just to give the name in general about the small suppliers. We need investment products that are long-term, of course. We need advance payments for these farmers. We need also to insert somehow an incentive for sustainability. And when it comes mainly, essentially for equities, we need to have, we suggest to have an exit strategies foreseen since the beginning to make sure that we preserve impact once we leave an investment. And to achieve this, we need to know who are our suppliers, what are their needs. And as investors, we need to know the specificity of the sector. You know, if there's a specific production calendar, what is the timing, and also what is the potential of our suppliers. There are investors that really seek for the social impact, environmental impact. So what is the potentiality of investing in this case? Once we know what are our suppliers, then we can design the technical assistance. I'm sure everybody knows how important it is, sustainable forest management practices, and of course also the entrepreneurial aspect, business development, and notably financial literacy. It's very important when working with smallholders. All these practices don't happen in a vacuum. There is an ecosystem. We have public-private partnerships. We have first loss investor, generally development financial institutions, and we have extension services provided by governments. And of course, in the end, we have certification bodies with vast networks of contacts, local knowledge, in general, quite a bit of extensive networking on the ground, which we deem should be better leveraged. In 2019, we conducted a survey with 51 investors to try to understand how important sustainability issues are when they make a decision about investing. Invest, and I repeat, it's all focused on forestry and agriculture. We divided the survey in three major blocks, the classical major blocks of sustainability, economics, environmental, and social. The survey is very, very extensive. Here I'm giving you just few points, and you can find everything online and in the upcoming publication of the IISD. The survey was divided in two main, let's say it was twofold. There was one part where we would ask how important a sustainability issue is to reduce the financial risk of an investment and how important it is to generate impact. So how do you read this graph here? Let's say 56% of investors said that climate change is highly important to reduce the financial risk of an investment. And we can have comments later. If I go a little bit more into details and we look at the biodiversity conservation and natural resource management, here in the graph, I don't know if you see it properly or if you have our pictures on the way. As you can see, the external part, the red line, it shows the importance of this team to achieve environmental impact, while the blue one inside, smaller, it says how important these teams are to reduce the financial risk of an investment. So you can see immediately that water is considered important by investors to reduce the financial risk of an investment, while instead you can see the biodiversity is considered much less important, which will give a lot of room for us to work on. Now, if this can comfort you, it is a 2019 survey, so maybe in the meanwhile, things have got a little better. If I go a little bit more in details and I look at the answer of the investors, I don't know if you see, because I think we have the picture on the way, but I don't know if you see the picture, our photos on the way, I don't know. So the blue lines, for instance, biodiversity, if you want to look at forestry, is the dark red. And if you put together the high important and moderate importance, it comes quite a comforting result. So forestry is considered important to reduce the financial risk of an investment. But you can see very well that there are quite a few people who said that either biodiversity or forestry have little importance, even water for some people had little importance. And this, even one person who probably said the biodiversity is not important. So we have a lot of room for work. Okay, how do we link biodiversity and natural resource management to financial risk? Interesting to have also the experience of the audience and the other panelists. I'm just giving some example. Of course, soil conservation is connected to the financial risk of an investment. If I have good soil, the crop is going to be higher, the quality of the crop is going to be better, and my investment is going to be more profitable. And of course, this reduces my financial risk. How can forests reduce the financial risk? Well, imagine having a forest that protects a plantation from bad weather, then we don't only save the harvest, but we also save the plants. And this makes sure we don't have extra cost, for instance. So we can easily make, at least in my opinion, the connection from the biodiversity and natural resource management to the financial risk. This is just to give you a few examples. And how does all this relate to certification, which is going to be say the subject of the upcoming publication of IISD? Basically, what we are doing, we are studying how sustainability standards cover these issues considered important by investors. For instance, in the previous slide, we said this one. Let's say, for instance, forest, the dark red here, it shows quite a moderate importance for investors and also high importance for investors to reduce the financial risk. So for them, it's important. Now, do voluntary sustainability standards are aligned with this view of the investor? Do the voluntary sustainability standards provide a strict coverage of forest conservation? We went analyzing one by one a multitude of sustainability standards, and we came out with the conclusion that some of them cover these requirements well and others cover this requirement less. So there is room to improve the VSS as a tool to mitigate the financial risk of an investment, even though we are perfectly aware that some of these sustainability standards were developed for specific issues, so they don't necessarily cover all sustainability and social issues. But the type of comparison we are trying to make is in this respect, seeing how far the sustainability standard go on covering sustainability issues, and if these are aligned or not with what the investor require as a tool to mitigate risk. And on the other side, we identify that there is room to improve the knowledge of investors, for instance, about the importance of biodiversity. Denise, am I on time or am I short on? But this is, thank you very much. I leave the room for your questions. And
yeah, sorry, I wasn't in the yeah.
Thank you
We
very
have,
much.
we have the questions at the end with the Q&A
Sure.
session, right?
Thank you.
So, yeah. So we move on now to the presentations. So I'm now first inviting OXI-ZEN, and Christopher Banefo is going to present it. And I'm going to put the 12 minutes now, and on the 11th minute, I'm going to just say 1 minute left, and then I will let you know when it's 12 minutes as well. Okay, are you ready, Christopher?
Sorry, I was muted. My
Okay, that's okay. That's no worries. We all do that.
We all do that. We all
exactly.
do that.
So,
yeah. So first of all,
yeah.
Very happy Earth Day to all my fellow brothers and sisters, both here and far. And it's an honor to share this day with you. So first of all, what we're going to talk about very, very briefly is the effective challenges that we have, a solution proposition that we have to offer, and then we can, if there's enough time, I'll also share a couple of examples with you. Bottom line, we have one spaceship, and that's our planet. That's the only thing that we have. There's no need to go to Mars and intergalactic space to figure out stuff. There's a lot of stuff we need to figure out here. There's water, there's life. I don't know what people are going to Mars looking for. However, we have a serious challenge, which is what I call the planetary, imbalance. And that is, when you look at it today, most people are talking about emission reductions, but in parallel, we need to talk about an increase in the carbon sequestration capacity of the planet. So when we look at overall what is happening, and we look at the global carbon market, and we look at how that reflects in the actual scientific fact. The scientific fact is that when we look at terrestrial carbon sinks, natural carbon sequestration, about 70% of the planetary carbon sequestration is happening in what we call the global south. That is the tropical forests, the tropical savannas, grasslands, the deserts, semi-deserts, wetlands. And about 20%, 30%, sorry, is in the temperate zones, north and southern hemisphere. And so when we take that into consideration, it is interesting to note that there is a global market for carbon trade of over $250 billion a year, which is money circulating in the global north, with less than 1.5% of that actually going down to the global south. That is, by the way, absorbing 70% of the carbon sequestration. So this is a challenge. It's food for thought. It leads certain questions to be asked. The current price, for example, on the European stock market, emission trading scheme is about 45 euros a ton. And yet there are people that are purchasing sequestration capacity rights at 50 cents a ton. This is ongoing as we speak right now. And so we can very quickly see that there's a lot of greenwashing going on, huge capital margins, etc., but with very little, actual effective impact on the climate. So going quickly back to the facts again, what we have is that 30% of all anthropogenic CO2 emissions due to human activity is actually absorbed by the terrestrial carbon sinks. 35%, between 30-40% goes into the oceans, which is causing acidification. And what the planet is unable to absorb stays in the atmosphere. That's why we have this increase in ppm exceeding 420 now from an original of 270 in pre-industrial times. So even if we achieve a 50% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2050, do we solve the problem? And I would be the one to say, no, we don't solve anything. Why? Because we can still only absorb 30%, which means 20% is still going into the ocean, which is it will be the continual cause of acidification. So what do we need to do? What we need to do is we need to shift the pivot point to generate an overall balance of CO2 emission and carbon sequestration capacity. So taking into consideration the success of a 50% reduction, it means that we need to increase our carbon sequestration capacity of the terrestrial carbon sinks or any other technology that may come along with it. But if we're looking at terrestrial carbon sinks, we need to shift that pivot point, which basically we're talking about, we need to increase the existing terrestrial carbon sinks by 60%, food for thought. So what does this mean? The other challenge we have is that according to the Paris Agreement and the CDM mechanism of the compliance market, we have this interesting thing called the condition of additionality. What does that mean? It means we are conveniently excluding existing carbon sinks from being able to be monetized. So if anybody wants to know why the Amazon is burning, it's very simple. Those who have a forest, the only way to monetize the forest is by literally destroying the forest. So the condition of additionality is one of the most ludicrous additionality conditions, because that is basically causing the destruction of the forest as we have it right now. What this means, in other words, if somebody plants a couple of trees in a parking lot today, they can benefit from the monetization of the carbon sequestration capacity, whereas somebody who is looking after a stakeholder, an indigenous population that are the stakeholders and the shepherds of a 400-year-old carbon sink, a forest, they get nothing, zero. They are excluded from monetizing the carbon sequestration capacity. And that is a shame. So what do we need? We need a solution that gives incentives to the existing stakeholders of existing carbon sinks. And if we can do that and have a scientific way of measuring and assessing that sequestration capacity, then we have something that we can actually go with. So the aim is to create a synergy that is a win-win. So the solution that we are proposing and we are working on, and we're actually going live later this year, is basically a global CO2 management system using blockchain technology. 1, 2, it also allows CO2 emitters to identify and directly interact with CO2 converters. So we need to have a clear, vigorous, onboarding and auditing scheme. We need to have a way of measuring scientifically what the absorption capacity is, and then enable a transparent way of value exchange. The assessors and the auditors that we're working with includes Restore, which is a collaboration between the ETH in Zurich, the ÖPFZ, or the Swiss Federal Technical University of Zurich, the Crowther Lab, and Google. So we are working with them, and at the same time, all our audit data, physical data that we're getting in situ from the carbon sinks are fed back into the scientific community as additional data for what is called the Global Carbon Sink Model. We have, we also work with the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences, and they are working with us to do the assessment of carbon sequestration capacity of marine carbon sinks. The actors we have are basically the emitters and the converters. Every 1 ton of carbon that is sequestered is tokenized, and we represent them as Gaias, as a CO2 token. We differentiate them between a green Gaia, a blue Gaia, and a white Gaia. Green of a terrestrial carbon sink, a blue of a marine carbon sink, and the white Gaia is based on an industrial process. Each Gaia represents precisely 1 metric ton of carbon sequestration over a time period of 12 months, is linked to its own exclusive database, which has information on the data analysis, information on the converter, information from the audit report, including a satellite image showing exactly where that 1 ton of carbon was sequestered, how, where, and when, with a timestamp from to. So by default, each Gaia is unique. So the system works that every converter sets their own pricing. The emitters on the left, they can engage with the converters of their choice. There is an exclusive payment token that allows a peer-to-peer direct transaction with no third parties. And effectively, we have a market-driven carbon price. So it's a floating price according to supply demand. In a nutshell, once there's a transaction report. And with that transaction report, the converters who have already agreed to a use of funds, which is also part of the audit. So every converter is linked to specific SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And so an emitter can not only select a converter according to the carbon sequestration capacity, but can also select them according to the SDGs. And that allows the emitter to optimize the SDGs to their corporate social responsibility statement. And that is then documented in the transaction report. That same transaction report can then be passed on to the investors, giving them the documentary evidence that they need to make sure that the emitter is meeting their ESG criteria. So this is one of the nice things, 1 minute, yep. One of the nice things about this value proposition is that in addition to verified scientific carbon sequestration, you can answer the how, where, and when, and you also can link very elegantly ESGs to corporate social responsibility to the SDGs. I have 30 seconds left. There are different examples here, but I'll just want to spend some time here very quickly. Average yield per hectare of soybean production in 5 countries, this was work done by Purdue University. The net yield in US dollar per hectare ranges between $9 in Argentina to $200 in Brazil. When you compare that to monetizing carbon sequestration capacity with regards to a tropical primary forest that averages roughly 7 metric tons of carbon in a year, at a price of $20, you can get a net yield of 140. At a price of $30, it's 210. So what this means is that the price right now is close to $50 on the European trading scheme.
Yeah.
I understand. Last sentence, which basically shows that you can exceed the net yield by monetizing the carbon sequestration capacity of a carbon sink compared to many other land usages that are currently used. And that gives you food for thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Dany, are you ready now for your presentation?
Good.
Good. So we do the same when we start, and I will let you know 1 minute left to resume. Okay. So when you're ready, you tell me, yeah?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay.
I'm not so good in English, but I will try my best. And I hope that you will get some message from me. Thank you for inviting me. I'm working as technical coordinator for the Congo-Basin Forest Partnership now under the facilitation of Germany. And the Congo-Basin Forest Partnership was launched in 2002 by the former Secretary of State, Colin Powell, in 2002 at the World Sustainable Development Summit in Johannesburg. And now we have like 120 members, a range of the 10 countries of Central Africa, and also international organization in the UN system, or donor countries, private sectors, university, and so on, civil society. All these 120 members working together to coordinate and to be more effective in their intervention in Congo Basin region. And the Congo Basin Forest Partnership cover, as you hear, the Congo Basin. The Congo Basin and its forest ecosystem is an impressive and extraordinary natural heritage of Central Africa and constituting the second largest forest cover in the world, the southern green land of the planet, and of an importance in terms of biodiversity, the carbon storage, whose regulation of global climate, and unique peatland, and also in terms of population, culture, rich and diversity, tradition, and also in terms of economic importance, the forests ensure an essential role of national and local economies. And now in the Congo Basin, one of the key pieces in which we are working is to plead for the place and the whole place of the Congo Basin to be granted equitably regarding international mechanism, biodiversity and forestry. That is the voice of the Congo Basin to be heard, and also the equitable geographic distribution of international financial resources. And for that, in December 2020, the CBFP Governing Council meeting was held in Kinshasa, where CBFP member had the opportunity to work on a common positioning for the important international conferences such as the CBD COP15 and the COP26, and also the other Congress. And this common position is reflected in a declaration, which is the declaration of the Central African countries supported by the Congo Basin CBFP members. This declaration, which is the voice and common position of the countries of the COMIFAC and ECAS space and its partner gathered within the CBFP, will then be used to send a strong signal to the countries, to the international communities, for their common effort to preserve the environmental function and ecosystem service of the forests of the Congo Basin. The declaration of the countries of the COMIFAC and ECAS space countries serve also to coordinate the participation of the Congo Basin in the international event, what I already mentioned. This declaration is yes, it's a new deal between the Congo Basin and the international communities, which present what the Congo Basin offer and what the Congo Basin intend to receive from the international communities. The key point here is just to mention that the 20, as you know, 10 to 20% of the carbon is lodged on the tropical forestry, and the Congo Basin as the second largest. The plaidoyer is to have an equitable distribution of the international climate financing, the biodiversity financing, which is from now mostly flow in the South, in the Amazon region and the Southeast Asia. And we believe that if based on the Congo Basin contribution to the global climate regulation, it is time now to move forward and to make sure that the region receive the resources which will help to keep the forest, to protect the forest, to protect the biodiversity, and then to regulate the climate.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation, Dany.
You're welcome.
And now our third presenter is Chris Laurent. Chris, are you ready for sharing your presentation?
Yeah, you're gonna have to give me the possibility to share, right?
Your co-host, right?
Yeah, then that works. Okay, so I'm assuming you're seeing my screen here.
Yes.
It's green in the background, so we start now.
I see you and the presentation. Yeah, so you can start.
Okay, let's go for it.
Yes.
Good. So I'm here to introduce the company and the concept behind FLS, right? So to do that, we're going to use the why, what, and how structure, and then we'll have a slide about our investment requirements, and then we can wrap up. I do want to say that this presentation comes with annexes, but these are to be viewed at your convenience. Okay, great. So without further ado, let's continue, and I will let that sink for a couple of seconds. So today, with the 22nd of April, as seen from Mauna Kea in Hawaii, we stand at 417.64 ppm part per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, and it's rising. All right. So there are synergies with what Christopher was talking about here earlier, and I'll conclude with him. It's not just the fact that it is rising. I want to say that this roughly corresponds to about 875 gigatons of CO2, and that 35% of that is what is called this anthropogenic CO2. That's man-made. So what do we do about it? Christopher mentioned it before. There's no two way about it. We absolutely need to reduce our emissions. However, this will not suffice. It will not suffice because we still need to remove the excess. And to do so, there are two possibilities. We can use technology, and we are getting there slowly but surely. And we can simply do it the way our planet intended with forestry. Okay, so carefully managed forestry comes with a bevy of advantages, being to regulate rainfall, limit floods, sustain biodiversity, traditional ways of life and economies as well. And of course, it's a very efficient and cost-effective way of reclaiming CO2 from the atmosphere. Now, those forestry projects exist in different guises and forms. We have mentioned that NGOs are involved indeed, and foundations do it, as well as some more organizations and governments. Yet I would like to concentrate for this particular presentation on the additional potential brought by investors and investable projects, right? Now, there's a key fundament for these projects is the access to capital. And this is where the paradox in the title comes in. Not long ago, about 8 months ago, PwC issued a survey stating that today's assets under management amount to about $110 trillion US. Now, here's the paradox. Yet only about 50 billion or 0.05% of that is allocated to forest-related projects, and precious few of those are reforestation or afforestation projects. Okay, now let's move on to the what. So what is it that FLS wants to achieve? And before I tell you about these 50 billion and the so-called TMOs, where they are mostly parked, let's first take a look at the world map and consider a couple of countries relative to forest growth, right? I hope you see this. Okay, here we go. We have an interesting one in Congo here. So let's consider that. In northern countries, we would have a typical growth rate about a forest, okay, in southern Canada or Sweden, for instance, of 7 cubic meters per hectare per annum. Now in Paraguay or Congo, and Paraguay being one of the very first projects we will actually get, this moves to 45 cubic meters. So not all forested areas are created equal. So that means that the careful carefully choosing a location where to have a forest is very, very important. So before we move on to the TMOs, there's one more thing I would like to show, and my presentation is not working any longer. Okay, good. So there are mega trends currently showing that the price of lumber is going up, okay? So this itself comes obviously from an increase in demand. And if you say increase in demand, then there is an increase in the need of having forests available. Good? Okay, so let's continue with the rest of that particular slide. So let's talk about TMOs. So those timber investment management organizations, so TMOs for short, they are exclusively closed-end 7 to 10 years fund, invested, as you can see on the map, primarily in North America, but not just. There are some other pockets in Brazil and also a couple in Australia and New Zealand, but this is mostly in Northern America. Now, the structure of these funds, they are heavily invested in highly intermediated auction markets. They have high fees, and their limited time horizon does no longer, we believe, make them suitable for sustainable forestry and effective CO2 sequestration. So what I'm portraying here really is a mismatch based upon short-term thinking versus sustainability and versus the choice of locations, okay? And this is where FLS comes in, okay? Through the launch of a brand new asset class based on securities, the acquisition of carefully selected projects, and the corresponding MRV. We're going to talk about it in the next slide. I'm checking my time. We're fine. FLS wants to reinvigorate forestry, okay, and interest in investing sustainably on the part of customers. So this is a B2B concept, by the way. Our customers would be typically asset managers, but not just. And again, we've carefully designed more attractive products. We want to diversify into more favorable, currently unused geographic regions where political stability, climate conditions, and the presence of a holistic ecosystem, the so-called wood cycle, are conducive to more efficient and sustainable forestry projects. And finally, we want to contribute to no less than 7 of the United Nations goals and bring wood the respectability it finally deserves. Good. So we are now moving to the how, and the how, it actually means, how does FLS do business? We're going to have 3 slides about it. So you understand now that FLS is an investment advisor, an asset manager that structures securities to be sold to institutional investors and corporates. It is based on a financial model with 3 revenue sources. So we have arrangement fees, we have advisory fees and license fees, which you would traditionally find with asset managers, but with CO2 certificates on top as an option, right? Okay, this obviously relates to what FLS does. So we have main activities. There's really 3 + 1, right? So standard setting for the actual investment, okay, the development of the securities, the selection of the transaction, and the next one is important because it's one thing to attract customers, okay, so here we're talking about investors, but you want to keep them for the long term to keep investing in the forest, okay, good. So to do this, you need to put in place a framework, okay, so we call it servicing during the lifetime of the investment. And there's a couple of important points here because the planting, the caring, the harvesting, this will bring local jobs. This will be done via local companies, okay? And then we're going to talk about this MRV framework that I'm talking about. This stands for monitoring, reporting, and verifying. And this is the object of the next slide. So we want to bring technology into the mix. This is something that is primarily done in agriculture. We see it a lot, but less so as far as forestry projects are concerned. So we are currently talking, for instance, to a satellite imagery company. And the purpose, obviously, is to bring us data real time that can be fed to the investors and for them to understand that good care is taken of their investment. The trunks are doing good and the forest is healthy. It is progressing at the rate we want it to progress, and so on and so forth. Okay. So the presentation would not be complete without a look at the current team. So Alessandro is with us today. Alessandro Materni and Bernd Reuter, they are, let's call them serial entrepreneurs. They've been very, very successful with a previous project of theirs that came actually quite close to become a unicorn. Okay. Both of them are financiers. I had the privilege to actually work with Bernd on my last project, and the two of us were already working on an impact project in that we tried to put together a bank on a phone, just like Revolut, okay? A bank for the unbanked. Now, what is very important is that those guys have very long arms and they're very, very credible relative to the people they brought onto the advisory board. I'm not going to mention all of them, but Carl-Henrik Sandström certainly is the ex-CEO of Stora Enso. So Stora Enso is one of the largest, if not the largest, owner of forest on this planet, okay? And Noel himself also worked for Stora Enso, where he was in charge of ESG, okay? And he conducted multiple projects, cross-industry and environmental initiatives. So this is who has already joined us. I have a minute left, so that's good. These are the investment requirements. We're talking about 2 tranches of 3 million each, the second one being optional upon FLS reaching set goals, right? Through experience, we would prefer to have a limited number of investors, okay? And certainly we want an investor that is passionate about the topic that we're talking about, right? So I have the use of tranche 1, okay? So remember that this is a project and we are in the concept phase, right? And this year will be the year where it actually becomes real, right? So the use of tranche 1 will be for structural and legal fees. The deal originations, think that this is a platform. We need to acquire the deals themselves and the customers, right? We will have placement fees. There's obviously due diligence with the investors.
1 minute left. Yeah.
1 minute?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Okay, so we have some travel and expenses, obviously. There's going to be a basic team that's going to have to be compensated. We're going to have to obviously found and capitalize the company, and there will be also work on IP. I have mentioned that we will onboard technology coming from third parties, and it is quite possible that we would have this to adapt this technology that would then become our own IP. And I thank you for your attention. I'm actually done anytime.
Yeah, 25 seconds left. Thank you.
Okay, so
Great.
here are the contacts. Once again, you have lots of different information that we have packed in as the annexes. The roadmap is there, the type of investors we want to talk to, why it actually makes sense to work with us, okay? And that's it. That's the end of my 12 minutes.
Okay,
Good.
wonderful.
Thank you once again.
Thank you, thank you. So thank you so much for the presenters. Maybe now, oops, I need to, I have my timer here. Now Christian, you start with the panel discussion, right?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you so much, Denise, for moderating the first part of our Earth Day webinar. My name is Christian Kinkombe. I'm the managing partner of 4P Group. Before I present the 4IP group, slide missing now. Okay, let me just start by saying that exactly 2 years ago, 2 years ago, April 24th, the Global Impact Investing Network, the so-called GIN, released its Scaling Impact Investment in Forestry report. That report actually highlighted that over the past 2 decades, investment in sustainable and impact forestry has grown steadily as the threat of climate change mounts. The GIN report takes a closer look at the landscape of impact managers and asset owners active in the market to provide recommendations on how to unlock more capital flow into the sector. The report follows earlier research by Cambridge Associates and GIN on so-called financial performance of impact investment funds focused on real assets, which showed that the financial performance of sustainable timber investment managers outperformed that of conventional timber, for example. This attractive financial performance, coupled with a compelling opportunity to deliver impact, yields a market ready for significant capital infusion. The biological growth cycle of trees is not influenced by economic cycles and provides longer tenured investment that often match institutional investor portfolio management needs. The report came up with 5 recommendations on how to expand products and grow allocation to sustainable and impact investment in the forestry sector. First, improve and clarify product market fits. That is, the structure of many sustainable and impact forestry funds includes a number of distinct and disparate cash flow, making it difficult to project and advise on both risk and return. Second, use blended finance to catalyze investment. Blended finance combines capital with different levels of risk tolerance. For impact forestry strategies that do not match the risk profile of some mainstream investors, it can provide necessary risk mitigation to attract that capital. 3, develop partnerships. Partnership with conservation organizations can allow for the sale of land rights and enhance overall sustainability. For example, conservation easements in the US have leveraged a regulatory framework to conserve land in perpetuity while sustainably managing and deriving value from that land. 4th, integrate vertically, that is, increasingly and sustainably impact fund managers operate vertically and operate vertically integrated supply chains by investment into management or processing companies. This reduces costs and provides managers an opportunity to manage social and environmental impact across the full supply chains. And finally, strengthen communication among asset owners. A lack of understanding of the business model and actual risk of forestry funds constrains capital allocation. Effective communication between investors and fund managers is essential for the expansion of the market. Okay, so very briefly before we start the discussions of the 3 excellent presentations that we heard during the first part, let me just very briefly tell you about 4IP Group. We are an investment advisory boutique focusing on the following key services: ESG integration advisory service, impact measurement and management, providing investment opportunities, and last but not least, we are in the process of setting up an impact infrastructure fund. So basically, our vision is in magnifying the social good to elevate humanity through mobilizing capital for sustainable development. In other words, 4IP Group is committed to working with and joining forces with civil society, impact enterprises, asset managers, asset owners on the front line of climate change to inspire climate action ahead of COP26, which is why we have chosen to organize today's event with our strategic partner SiDeMi, represented by Dany. Okay, so without any further ado, I will hand over the word to our 2 discussants that also happens to be 2 compatriots from Denmark. So let's start with Mette. Maybe just a couple of lines for the listeners and those who are with us online. You will see the detailed biography in the program, but maybe you can say a couple of words about yourself before you start the discussion. Over to you.
Certainly. Thank you, Christian. I'm presently with a Danish environmental NGO called Forests of the World. I'm responsible for our activities in Ethiopia and Uganda. I've worked with FSC as a forest certification system. I've also worked with the African Development Bank as a Chief Program Officer for the Congo-Basin Forest Fund. So I know some of you already from that capacity. Presently, though, I'm a greenie and I'm a representative of civil society. And I'm also one of the practitioners who are trying to make ends meet from the bottom up instead of from the top down, so to speak. And should anybody say to me that, what about impact investments? I might be cheeky and paraphrase Gandhi and say, I think that would be an excellent idea. I think it's been difficult to date to get them to materialize in the idealized version. I think it holds great potential in terms of addressing the triple crisis that we're facing with climate change, with biodiversity, and the increasing inequality that's both within certain countries and between countries around the world. I'm very encouraged, though, by what we're hearing here today. I think there's great potential with fintech to maybe address some of the corruption issues we see often around forestry. I think there's also great potential with fintech to maybe cut some of the transaction costs that are also so very difficult to address presently. Digital money, the blockchain technology in terms of transparency is also quite promising. There are still a lot of challenges to address in that respect. We're trying to introduce something, for instance, in Ethiopia and Uganda, and what you're seeing is that you have different digital systems in terms of digital wallets. In some places in Ethiopia, it's not quite permitted or introduced yet. You have 86 different local languages. You have people who are still quite illiterate in terms of reading and mathematical stuff. And as an NGO, we're also quite concerned and would like to put this to some of our excellent first movers and companies here, investors, on how to address, as Christopher addressed briefly, that actually if you want to address some of these issues that we're facing, maintaining existing forests is actually what gives us the highest impact. You have the highest biodiversity. If you release that carbon by leaving it be and letting it be degraded or deforested, you will have a quite quick release, as you also mentioned, Christopher, like the Amazon burning. It's an immediate release of carbon, and it will take you, I don't know how many years and decades of reforestation and afforestation to capture that carbon again. So you are also, when you're using biomass as a fuel, as energy sources, you're actually creating a carbon debt. So we're quite concerned with some of those issues, with the leakage that you might also see. You might have excellent projects, if you look at them in isolation, coming in, doing reforestation, afforestation, maybe even mixed indigenous species that support biodiversity, maybe FSC certified as well. But you may also actually move existing people living, depending on the forest, off the land because somebody at government level thinks it's a good idea to introduce these excellent projects, again, looking at them in isolation. And local forest dependent people, of which there are hundreds of millions around the globe, may not necessarily have a pecuniary, a monetary profit from those forests, but it may be their security net if the harvests fail, if they get unemployed or droughts or other external shocks hit them. So to get a little more into this discussion, I would like to put to you the question of how to incorporate those concerns in business models. Because in my view, it's very difficult with the level of organization you need and the capacity to organize at local communities for forest-dependent peoples. How could you incorporate them in that value chain? And how could you use fintech, for instance, to make sure that they benefit directly from all your excellent projects and impact investments? I might come back later, but I think maybe Martin should also have a chance to pull out some points that he's noted during the presentations. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Mette. And again, without any further ado, since we're a little bit behind schedule, Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Christian. It's a great pleasure to be here, and although I'm only a half Dane. Funny to have three of us, one after the other here. My background is as a fund manager. I used to run the Moringa Fund, which is an agroforestry investment fund investing in Africa and Latin America. These days, I work more in an advisory capacity through my company Acacia, working in natural assets, forestry, agriculture, agroforestry, the oceans. And my focus area is significantly around mobilizing capital for those sectors, public sector capital, private sector capital. So let me make a few comments on the really interesting presentations that we've had already this evening, and then maybe just highlight a particular issue that I think is interesting to perhaps talk about a little bit more before we finish this evening. And the main thing to say about what's been presented, I think, that I see at least, is that there are some really important things that have been talked about in terms of how land is used. Of course, forestry is one way of using land, but then you have agroforestry, we have plantation forestry, we have sustainable natural forestry. So it was really good to have smallholders put forward, and the agroforestry aspect is a key part of the overall solution, but it's not the only part of it. The second thing to say is that also thinking solutions here, there's a number of really interesting technical and financial innovations that have been talked about tonight through Oxygen and FLS, and creativity is a key part of the solution here. So bringing new solutions to the table is important, because I think, as we all know, as a general backdrop here, and I'm thinking particularly about the presentation we had about the Congo-Basin and the African perspective, which is one that I know quite well, having been part of the African Development Bank in my past. The Congo-Basin is a great example of a superb existing carbon sink, which needs to be protected and maintained, and has a great potential, of course, to continue along with other forests in the world to solve the problems we're dealing with. But then the innovative solutions that were presented as well are crucial as well, to bring in more capital to make these dysfunctional systems work. And I say dysfunctional because the supply of capital today is way, way below where it should be. I think that was clearly highlighted in the FLS presentation. The potential of forestry is huge. The risk profile is something that I think is problematic at the moment. So the perceived risk of putting capital into the forestry sector and all of its different flavors, I've listed them already, I think now, is problematic today. And if I again just zoom into the African example, 20 years ago, big institutional investors, pension funds and other things were just beginning to put money at scale into African forestry. And that didn't really take off in a big way, or anything like as big a way as it should have done, because on a number of projects, environmental and social issues were encountered, which created bad publicity, and some of those big investors scaled back, and the ramp up never really happened. So I think on the risk side, let me say a couple of things. One is it has to be done right. If capital is going to be deployed at scale, if it's done wrongly, it can backfire and go wrong in many, many different ways. Social issues can arise, environmental issues can arise. Forests can ultimately be subject to threats such as fire. So doing it right is really important. And on the capital supply side, the role of blended finance and structured finance, and FLS for me is an example of structured finance, is incredibly important as well. And so we've talked already about a number of sources of funding tonight, like the Green Climate Fund, public funds. Bringing that money in a subordinated way, in a way which accepts more risk than the private sector today is willing to take or able to take, is a crucial part of the solution, in my opinion, here. And so continuing to work on good ways of blending finance, good ways of structuring finance, having the public sector remain present and playing the role they have to play to encourage the private sector to come in at scale, is a crucial part of the solution here as well. I'll stop there, but those are my thoughts on how to make sure that the capital that this sector really, really needs does come in.
Christian, you're mute.
Yeah, thank you so much, Martin, for those observations. So, so we'll move on now to the panel discussion. So we'll start by allowing the three presenters to react to some of the observations that you have received from our two excellent discussants. So why don't we start with Alessandro, who's hasn't had the chance to speak yet. Maybe you can start by introducing yourself, and then maybe we can react to some of the remarks made by Martin.
Okay, so there's not a lot to say about me. I've been working in the financial industry for almost 30 years now. I've done practically everything that has to be done in the financial industry except steal money and defraud people. The rest I've done. Okay, so so I've been investment banker, asset manager, structured finance, the cross between insurance and capital markets and all of this. And I think it's not really very interesting to talk about me. Let's talk about the issue at hand, which is more urgent. I think when we are talking about environment at the moment, we are not talking about a patient which is a bit sick. We are talking about somebody who is in the battlefield and is bleeding out. And the person on the battlefield that is bleeding out is our planet. We don't have an immense amount of time to do something. And believe me, I've now spoken to very, very large investors all over the planet. And there is a big disconnect between what everybody says that needs to be done and what they are actually doing. And there are various reasons for this. Now, the reason, we know that in order to recapture about 200 of the 300 gigatons that are in the atmosphere of excessive CO2, anthropogenic CO2, one would have to reforest today 900 million hectares of our planet. This is something which is not going to be possible. It's going to take lifetimes, and by the time this takes place, we will have another 47 billion tons of CO2 just because of deforestation taking place mostly in the Congo and in the Amazon forest and so on. And we're going to leave a big mess for our children. That's the situation. So I hear everything that you say, and biodiversity and all of this and so on. At some point in time, when the patient is dying, you need to try to stop the bloodlet. You need to do whatever it takes to stop it. And you need to keep these other things in mind, because it doesn't make sense to stop the blood flow and then the patient dies of something else, of course. But you need to stop the blood flow. That's for certain. And forestry is one solution. It's probably the most practical solution. And the reason what is quite difficult to invest in forestry is that because if you reforest, it takes a several number of years before you start having yield. Okay, all these TIMOs, they invest, and by the way, the large insurance companies, the endowments in the US, they invest in existing forests. They invest in existing forests because from day one they start having a yield. The forest, and there when we talk about conservation, there is a slide. Chris, could you put up maybe the slide with the curve, with the curve of how trees capture CO2?
Denise, is that okay if I can share my screen? You need to allow me.
So a cubic meter of wood captures roughly 2.5 tons of CO2. That's what it does. But in order to have a cubic meter of wood, you need to wait. It doesn't just the moment you plant it, it does not. Can you go to page 16 or 17, the one with the curve, please? And you should take away your, no, further down, please. The one with the curve, the growth curve of the trees. This one. Thank you. And
then the full screen to see all, I think, yeah.
We are still seeing your full screen.
Yeah, full screen mode. Thank
you very much. Okay, so basically what happens, the trees grow in accordance to this green, dark green line. And once a tree is grown, it does not capture additional CO2. It may have a value because of biodiversity. It has, because it rots, it does not, but actually it does not produce additional wood. The wood that falls to the ground rots. It releases CO2 back into the atmosphere, and it releases methane, which is actually much more potent as CO2 as a greenhouse gas. So if you want to maximize the CO2 effect of a forest, just protecting a forest without doing anything with it is better than burning it down or cutting it, of course, but having a managed forest is superior than having a natural forest for CO2 perspective. Because what you have to do in order to maximize the capture of the CO2, you need to cut when the marginal growth becomes smaller than the average growth so far. And at the point in time, theoretically, you have to cut in order to maximize your CO2 sequestration. Then if you burn the tree, if you use it only for bioenergy, for biomass, then you're not going to achieve anything, because you're still going to achieve something on average, but you're going to release it back into the atmosphere. If you use it for construction, then you have a permanent sequestration of the CO2. Nevertheless, most products that we have so far in the market, they cut much earlier. They cut earlier because they want to increase their internal rate of return. And the current situation does not allow for real sustainable forestry. What it does is you are only allowed to cut the growth, okay? That if you follow the SFI or the various requirements in the Nordics, the FSC requirements is basically you don't have to cut anything. So you are not allowed to cut wood in order to get FSC certification. But we also need to remember that there is a reason why there are less forests today than there were years ago. And this is because people cut or burn the forest. And they do it because for them, a plot has more value if there is no forest on it than if there is a forest on it. And this has to change. So I agree with Christopher that you need to increase the value of a forest for the population which would otherwise cut it. You can do it by giving carbon certificates, or you can do it in less valuable forest by allowing them to partake in the business of having a sustainably managed forest.
Okay, thank you, so Alexander. Just to have a little bit more of extension, because it's a discussion. So thanks a lot for that very substantial input. Maybe let's have Christopher, give him a chance to respond to what Alexander just said. And Christopher, please keep your remarks as brief as possible.
I'm sorry.
To allow us to address as many issues as possible during the short time we have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll pick up from where Alessandro left off. Alessandro is saying everything correctly with regards to the conventional wisdom. However, science is a little bit further ahead. So let's look at how carbon sequestration actually works. We know that a plant using photosynthesis separates the CO2 molecule, captures the C, releases the O2, and that C is basically, you can measure it in the form of biomass. The fact is, every plant captures more carbon than it needs. Whatever the plant does not need is now passed into the soil through the roots. The question to ask now is what happens when the carbon is in the soil? There's an ecosystem in the soil. There's an exchange of carbon between different microorganisms, fungi, bacteria, you name it. There's an exchange, there's an independent ecosystem there. In a simplistic way, the richer the soil, the more biodiverse the soil, the more carbon the soil can retain. A soil that is depleted, that is weak, that has little biodiversity is unable to sequester, hold that carbon, and it releases it over time. So what does that mean? It means that visually, you can imagine every plant, every tree is a carbon pump that takes the carbon out of the air and pumps it into the ground. What this also means, on the other hand, is that when you're looking at two geolocations that may have identical plants, identical forests above the ground, but have different soils, one can be a net carbon sink, whereas the other can be emitting, releasing carbon. And so to understand the full carbon retention capacity of a piece of land, of a geolocation, you must look at what is happening above ground, and you must look at what is happening below ground. It is the two that creates the net, and that is what needs to be measured. So a grown tree, a tree that is fully mature, that is not increasing in biomass per se, is nevertheless capturing the same amount of CO2, but is pumping that into the ground. The curve that you showed is basically the CO2 retention is equal to the increase in the wood volume. That's the old method that science has proven to be wrong with regards to measuring CO2 sequestration. That is just on the side, right? This is all the more important to show that a mature forest with a large biodiversity in the soil has the maximum sequestration capacity vis-a-vis a planted monoculture forest. So we need to keep that in mind. So we need to understand the science, the facts, and then business models need to be developed accordingly.
Okay,
so that's just a very quick, response.
Thanks a lot. Very interesting. We don't want to keep it too scientific because keep in mind that we are addressing impact investors who might not be privy to that. But that was a very good explanation. Maybe that leads me to Ms. Pokem, Dr. Pokem. Maybe you could address some of the issues raised by Mette. And maybe while you're talking, you could maybe also say what is the difference in view of what Christoph just has said. What is the difference between the rainforest in the Congo-Basin versus Amazonas or the rainforest in Southeast Asia? Are they different in the soil, as Christopher he was alluding to? Over to you, Dany Pokem.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Biologically difficult for me to give an answer, but I do know that all the three are the tropical are located in a basin. This means a big river. The Congo Basin River is the second largest, and then you have the Amazon as the first one, and the Southeast Asia as the third one. And from the size, that is what I was saying, that the Congo Basin is the second largest cover, I think 301 million hectare forest. And now you have, in terms of carbon, we estimate 80 billion ton of carbon. And as you know, we have also the peatland. I wrote some text in the chat, which you have 145,000 square kilometers, which is the area in the Congo Basin of peatland, and about 30 billion ton of carbon. And now the last study, I also share it in the chat, published by the Museum, Royal Museum of Belgium is the latest one who calculate an estimate of the carbon sequestration comparing the three main forest cover. This means Amazon, the Central Congo Basin, and then the Southeast Asia, and show that the Congo Basin is the only one now scientifically area which absorb carbon, who can lock carbon comparing to the Amazon. But you have the link in the chat, and therefore this was also is the plaidoyer which we would like to raise this issue at the international community. And then this, because this situation need to be reflected in the climate funding financial mechanism within the UNFCCC, like the Clean Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, the main funding from the convention itself. Concerning the other area like the Climate Investment Fund, the non-market base, you have from the Congo Basin perspective, a very, very little engagement. The only one was the Forest Investment Program from the CIF, which is now not so working, or the funding is not anymore provided. And therefore we are calling to reform the REDD+ process, which didn't really deliver for the Congo Basin region, and to perhaps find another way which will help to really lock the international investment for the Congo Basin. I just share one example with you concerning the forest restoration, in which the Congo Basin pledged for 36 million hectares, which has the potential to save 3.3 gigaton, which is the double of what the Green Climate Fund now is funding with the 8.5 billion already committed by the Green Climate Fund. The save in carbon is 1.8 gigaton, and investing in the Congo Basin pledgement in the landscape restoration on the 36 million hectare will have the potential of 3.3 gigaton and 11 billion economic benefit. This means I think that we have a great potential in the Congo Basin region, and we hope that through the declaration we are negotiating now, it will be an opportunity then to lock more funding at the international community for the Congo Basin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dany. Again, given the time, we'll do one more round for everyone, and I think it would be most logical for Mehdi maybe to respond, giving your former role in the African Development Bank dealing with the Congo Basin, maybe to respond to what Dany just mentioned about the capacity that the Congo Basin actually has as a carbon sink compared to Amazonas and Southeast Asia, and of course the work that you're doing in your NGO in Uganda.
Well, I can only agree that it has tremendous potential in terms of the carbon storage, I would say, and again, just echoing what we're saying about both the above ground and the underground storage. It's something like the peat forests, both in Indonesia and in the Congo Basin. They hold a tremendous amount of carbon, and if that burns or gets felled and degraded, that emits a huge amount of carbon that is much better kept in the soil and in the forest ecosystem. I think some of the issues, again, that maybe I touched upon earlier are obviously also present in the Congo Basin, that the level of organization of those that might actually be the custodians of the forest in daily life, the mechanism to incentivize them to conserve the forest is one of the challenges, one of the big ones. I think we also see in various African countries, and we certainly see it in Uganda and the DRC borders, that there's a lot of timber going back and forth. So there are issues in terms, again, of leakage control. You may do something that's quite sensible in one site, but that only moves the problem to the neighbor. So I think there's a lot of lobbying that we need to do, and I think there's a lot of potential for various kinds of tracking systems, including certification, to maybe come in at a scale that can help again with investment, to reassure investors that actually all of the considerations that need to be taken into account for forest management to be sustainable are actually being done.
Thank you, Mette. I have two questions for Martin, but I think given where the conversation is moving, I will take the second one. So how should project developers or companies select between different land use models, such as sustainable natural forestry, plantation forestry, or agroforestry, which you alluded to in your introduction?
Thanks, Christian. And let me be sort of the point here. And I think this is exactly where Mette's comments really were just going. But there are many components to the solution that we're all discussing here. And I think that if we adhere to the basic principles of sustainable finance, which in the end are something that makes sense from a business perspective, but also has positive impacts on the environmental and social sides, those can be a great way of guiding us in our individual approaches and initiatives to make sure that they are coherent and that they take things in a good direction generally. And that applies exactly to what you just said as well, Christian, in terms of how to select the approach to take if you are trying to implement an on-the-ground project, and that's just one of the components here, alongside the technology and other things. I think they're the most useful guide, if you like, alongside what I just mentioned, the basic principles of sustainable finance, is the technical side and the scientific side. What you do on the ground needs to make sense technically. It needs to replenish soils or maintain soils if the soils are in a good state when you start. And that ultimately is the best way to underpin your efforts and make sure that they're sustainable. And that in some cases will be agroforestry, in other cases plantation forestry, in other cases again sustainable natural forestry. Biodiversity has been mentioned on this call, and that is a very interesting aspect to the underlying objectives. It's very strong in natural forestry, as we know, and therefore sustainable natural forestry is interesting. But plantation forestry also has a role to play in certain cases. So there are many pieces to the jigsaw, and if you adhere to some simple principles as you implement those, it can all go in the right direction.
Okay, thanks a lot, Martin. So moving over back to you, Christopher. Again, I have a few questions for you, but again, in the interest of time, actually, I actually wanted you to say a little bit about your exchange platform, the role of blockchain. You didn't mention that too much in your presentation. If you could say something about that, bearing in mind that you're speaking to an impact investors who might want to invest in your project, where you're still doing capital raising for the project. So maybe you can say a little bit about that and why it would be attractive as an impact investor to invest in what you're proposing.
Yeah, that is a multifaceted question, and the easiest way to understand blockchain is that it's an operating system that allows us to take computing and accounting to a different level. It allows us to accomplish things that we couldn't do before. That's the easiest way of talking about blockchain without getting too much into it. So what does that mean? It means that what we're able to do is able to offer a transparent solution whereby a CO2 emitter can identify CO2 converters according to the search profile. So you can select a converter in a geolocation. You can choose the type of carbon sink. You can also, whether it's a marine carbon sink, terrestrial carbon sink, and agro-business, and a protected national forest, a protected area, whatever. And you can also link it to the use of funds and the SDGs that the converters, the stakeholders, the owners of the carbon sink have pledged to. Okay. The interesting thing now is that the emitters, once they engage in the transaction, they can see the price that the converter is charging. You can accept, you can negotiate. It can all be done, and it can all be done with a smartphone. So that's the interesting thing. It's a simple app, and it can be done. The beauty of it, and this is where it becomes powerful, is that 97.5% of the transaction amount goes from the emitter to the converter. So they receive that amount. OXI-ZEN charges a transaction fee of 2.5%. So that's the transaction fee that comes to OXI-ZEN. But more interesting than that is that you now, as an emitter, you know where your money is going to, compared to buying a certificate that nobody has a clue what it's all about. If you are offered a certificate from Costa Rica, one from Paraguay, one from New Zealand, you find out they're all using different metrics. They're all different standards. You have no clue who's doing what and how. Plus, there's no central registry. You don't know whether what is being offered to you is a multiple sale. In other words, somebody else has also used it. And these are the challenges that exist as we speak right now. And that is where blockchain comes in the sense that nobody can go back and start messing around with the database. So in a simplistic way. But in the interest of the conversation here, we've been speaking about investors, speaking about the stakeholders, speaking about biodiversity, as well as profits and this and that. Maybe there's a way we can close all this in a nice circle. So here's food for thought. We have a proposal with the South African government. Kruger National Park, most of you know about it. Kruger National Park is a headache. It's a cost center for the South African government. Most governments that have a national park, it's a cost center. You need to manage it. At the same time, there is a conflict with the park management and the population that are living in the periphery of the park. You are preventing them to have access into the park. At the same time, they are having service delivery challenges with the government. And so it's a mess. OXI-ZEN is coming in and is saying to SANParks, to the South African National Park Service, okay, do you know what the carbon sequestration capacity is of the park? No, it is, this is what it is. We did the satellite analysis. If you were to monetize that at a price that is below what is being offered on the European trading scheme right now, Kruger National Park can generate literally over 200 million euros a year. So with 200 million euros, based on the monetization of the carbon sequestration capacity, not only does this exceed the management budget of the park, but there's a huge delta left over that now can be used for service delivery of the population living at the periphery of the park. Once they are the recipients of that and they see an increase in the quality of service delivery, rural healthcare, provision of pipe-borne water, education, you name it, and they see that that benefit is coming from the park, what happens? They become your partners. They become the protector of what you're trying to do. So if somebody shows up tomorrow and says to a guy and says, hey, shoot me that rhino, I need that horn, I'll pay you 500 bucks. If this individual does not have a plan B, he may refuse once, he may refuse twice. The third time around, he may say, you know what the hell, let me go do that. Let me collect my 500 bucks because he has needs, right? Now, if on the other hand, he is a recipient of the service delivery due to the monetization of the carbon sequestration capacity of the park, he has a plan B, at which point he says, it's not in my interest to shoot that rhino. And he will say no. Who benefits? Humanity as a whole. And so there are ways of creating a win-win. This is the exciting thing. There's a way we can create a win-win. And so if we consider and think, right now, we heard the plea from Dany. You are sitting on the largest carbon sink on the planet. You're looking for funds, you're looking for this to manage this and that. The fact is, every year, we are spending in the Northern Hemisphere $250 billion plus on certificates, of which we all know 90% of that has zero impact on anything we want to have it as an impact. So if the same amount of money were used in a transparent way, scientifically audited and everything, then you would have a win-win situation for everybody. Those who are spending the money, they actually get certified sequestration. Those who are receiving the money have the means, have the incentive, they have a value to protect the carbon sink that they have. And all of a sudden, we start having a win-win.
Okay,
so
thanks a lot,
that way we can now close that circle.
Yeah, excellent. Very interesting. Before I give Alexandro the last word in this round, let me just allow Dany to respond to that. And if you think, given what you said in your first remarks, that could be the solution for the Congo Basin, please respond, and please be very brief and concise, because we also want to allow our participants to ask a few questions before we end this event. So Dany, please respond to that.
Yes, simply yes, because I'm really impressed on the presentation of Christopher, and also how the monetization work. This is really great, and I think I would like to collaborate with your organization so that we can see how to move forward, because this kind of estimation, financial side of that is really crucial. Also in our way to propose with the declaration we are working in now. This means really welcome. We have, like I already explained, 80 billion ton of carbon estimation, and also the peatland with a little bit like 30 billion. And therefore, I think it's a really huge potential in the Congo Basin, and your support will be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. And last but not least, Alexandro, so what is your unique value proposition, and why should impact investors be investing in your solution? And what could you offer a program such as the Congo Basin forest program?
I mean, what is unique is we do not purport that we would do forestry ourselves. Okay, we want to be the gate for the, let's call them sustainable forestry operators, to go to the market, to the capital market, the really big pot of money. And the idea would be to make them less dependable on voluntary payments, but they would basically participate in the normal flow of investments. And this takes standardization, it takes credibility, so it cannot be built from day one, but you need to start somewhere. And what we have is probably one of the few, if any, structures that would allow to create permanent capital for this type of projects, because ideally we would like to finance these projects in perpetuity, because forestry needs to be replenished all the time. You cannot clear cut and leave it, because you need to maximize the return. So ideally this would create permanent capital. And why an investor would invest in us is because I think without creating excessive return expectation for anyone, we can probably create a very pragmatic way of giving the money to the operators, being it agroforestry, being it plantations and so on, whereby any investor can decide which type of ESG impact it wants to have and which type of return, because there is a trade-off. Of course, agroforestry is much better than a plantation from an ESG point of view, but it also yields less. But we can make this choice, this trade-off transparent, and we would also like to attach a higher ESG value to the one which yields less but has a higher ESG standard. And by the way, let me just agree with Christopher that I believe that the limited issue-based mandatory CO2 certificate program does not really make too much sense. It's the contingent-based. The voluntary-based, additionality-based CO2 program has actually much more potential. Unfortunately, standards vary, and it has been very much prone to fraud. And within our program, we would also like to include solutions like the one Christopher, I mean, we didn't have his particular one in mind, we had another one, but we would like to include this type of solutions in order to make sure that it is transparent who, through his or her investment, made sure that this ESG impact is achieved.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I want to say, apologize to the many people who actually registered to participate in this event. There seems to have been a problem with the link. We had more than 75 people registered, and moreover, we are 20 minutes behind the schedule, but there are some passionate people who are still with us. So if there's one or two of you who would want to ask one question to the panelists, please do so before I hand over the words to the panelists for one final round of a wrap up in terms of how you see the next step towards COP26 in Glasgow later this year in November. Are there anyone who would want to raise any questions? And if so, please introduce yourself and keep the question as short as possible.
You're muted.
Okay, I can't see. Has anyone has raised a hand? Can you see? I can't see if there's anyone has raised a hand.
I don't see. No.
Okay. Again, as I said, this event will be recorded, so please feel free to send your question in writing, and we'll make sure to connect you to whoever within the panel you would like to connect with and discuss, particularly if you're an impact investor and you're looking to invest in one of those two very innovative solutions, as well as the program that we've seen in the Congo Basin. So I'll just ask everyone, including Francesca, in 1 minute to say what will be the key message or what will be the key recommendation that you would like to put forward, particularly in view of the COP26 in November this year. So let's start with Francesca, and then we move on to Mette. I don't know if Francesca is still with us.
I wonder if she left because she
Okay.
just said,
we are
yeah, maybe
behind
we
schedule.
want to make a, yeah.
Okay, so let's start with Mette.
Well, I think this was very encouraging, and I think that one of the things we should move forward with is trying to build networks across the actors that are needed to make these impact investments count on the ground. So I think, again, those cross-sectoral alliances will be very valuable. That would be my recommendation and encouragement.
Okay, then let's take Dany. What is your plea, Dany, that you alluded to?
Yes, like I explained, we're looking forward that the declaration, which is now under discussion within the Congo Basin countries and also the partnership, that this will give a strong voice of the Congo Basin and the international community concerning the offer of the Congo Basin, which is the Congo Basin ecosystem and then the demand side of the Congo Basin from the international communities to reach a good and great deal for the region. I learned a lot concerning the carbon monetization and so on. I think it's very good, and we will keep in touch so that we can see how to move to network and then move forward and get more resources for Congo Basin. Thank you.
Yeah. And Martin, who has been both an impact investor that has been investing in the Amazonas and the Congo Basin, and now is in the advisory business, what will be your recommendations for the COP26 and moving forward?
It's a rather general one, I think, but COP26 and other global initiatives are trying to do things at scale, and of course, doing things at scale is essential here because we have a big problem that we're trying to solve. But I think, in particular, where innovation is involved, which is the case with a lot of the examples we've been discussing today and have been presented today, I actually think that it's really important to do things well, at least in the beginning, on a small scale, to illustrate that the innovation works, to show that new ways of doing things are possible, that new paradigms are possible, and to do them well, and to publish them through good, well put together case studies and examples. And now, today, with new media and social media, it's much easier to do that. But I think the power of well explained and well executed innovative ideas, businesses, technologies is very, very powerful. So I think that that's also really important as we feed into these big global initiatives to keep that kind of thing coming forward.
Okay, thanks a lot. And Alexandro, please.
Me again?
Yeah, what are your views in terms of moving forward? And do you have any recommendations for COP26 or other such global initiatives? In a few words, one just a couple of sentences.
My recommendations is to keep in mind that in order to get people to do stuff that you want them to do, you need to give incentives. And unfortunately, in my case, having to do with not on our own company, but for the projects, we are talking investors. So we are talking about financial incentives and security incentives. And blockchain goes in the right direction. But there are other additional things that need to happen. And I sincerely hope that will happen. But it will take a lot of effort by many different parties.
Okay, thanks a lot, Alessandro. And Christopher, you have the honor of having the last words in the panel discussion.
My aim is to really get everybody to understand the importance and the fact that our lives are all interconnected. There is no them and us. We're all on the same planet. And so in closing, I'd like to share a program that we have. It's called OES. Stands for OXI-ZEN Youth Education Solution. How does it work? We start with the children, because the children represent our future. We start with the 5-year-old kids, the first week in kindergarten. Every child, in this example, plants 3 trees. The trees are registered in the name of the child and become part of an afforestation program to increase the terrestrial carbon sink, so to speak. Now, what does that mean? The fact that the trees are registered, are growing, are absorbing CO2, it can be assessed and quantified through the OXI-ZEN program on the blockchain. The net effect at the end of the day is that the first tree finances the primary school education of the child. The first and second tree combined finances the secondary school education. The first, second, and the third tree combined finances the university, tertiary stroke, vocational training of the child. And so with a very simple program, you have a paradigm shift in the valuation of nature and of trees. The children become the protector of their trees. The parent of the children become the protector of the trees of the parents. And all of a sudden, you now have shifted the paradigm, okay? Now, what happens 20 years later? 20 years later, two of these kids get together, they form a new family. They have two kids. In this case, the mother and the father transfer their trees into the name of their kids. If they have a third child, what does that third child have to do? That child has to plant 3 trees. And so I'm using this as an example of how you can galvanize not just the people, but the younger generation, include them in the transformation of their future. And it goes to show that there isn't really much needed to have a huge impact, provided we are focusing on the right thing, that we're all, brothers and sisters on the same Mother Earth, whose birthday, literally, we're celebrating today. So that's my closing statement.
Very powerful. Thank you so much, Christopher. Let me just allow you to say a few words in conclusion. So what we have seen with today's webinar is that there's an increasing global interest from leading investors who want to help mitigate climate change and its effect on people and the planet. The forestry sector, if not overlooked, is certainly underappreciated for the contribution it can make to the environment as well as the health of communities. The impact investing in forestry has demonstrated that favorable financial performance, a sustained track record, a positive impact on carbon sequestration, as well as a number of other environmental conservation benefits, as we have heard by our excellent speakers today. So just in conclusion, let me put here so people can see that on the screen. So basically, I would like to thank all our excellent speakers. I would like to thank everyone who were able to participate despite the complication we have unfortunately had with the link to this event. However, this event will shortly be uploaded on 4IP Group's YouTube channel for those of you who wish to either watch the presentations again or for those who have not had the chance to be with us live. So please share this recording with your impact investor network, as well as the COP26 stakeholders, as well as your own stakeholders. Should you wish to further engage with any of the organizers or the panelists today, please do reach out directly to either myself or Denise, or even the Swiss Impact Investing Association, of which both of us are members. All that remains to say is to hope that you had a great Earth Day today and that we contributed to making this a great Earth Day. Please do reach out to us directly through the contact details. And all that remains to say is that we hope that to see you again later this year when the UK will host the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, the so-called COP26 in Glasgow, from the 1st to the 12th of November. And as you all know, the COP26 summit will bring parties together, as we have tried to do today, to accelerate action towards the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So with these words, I declare the meeting over. I wish you all a great evening, and I look forward to seeing you guys again in the near future.
Yeah, thank you.
Good evening.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great
Thank you.
evening. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Two people. Okay. It's just I stayed. I didn't go to the other one. It was interesting. I missed my other meeting, so it was very good.
I'm saying thanks a lot, Denise. It was a great pleasure to organize this event with you.
Yeah.
And I look forward to have our meeting next week.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, definitely. Bye-bye.
okay, bye-bye.